Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of our fireside chat with my friend Tim Devereux. Tim, when we left off, we were talking about some of the most recent cases that you had worked on at the appeals level and things like that, and you handle. It's not, I don't want to say weird cases, but just different fact patterns, right?
Unique.
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah. But you also handle just a kind of a run-of-the-mill car crash, semi-crash type case too, right?
I do those. Those typically, though, tend to include catastrophic injuries,
right?
Multiple deaths, things
right.
like that. So
right. You're not doing like the soft tissue.
No.
Those cases anymore.
I always tease my friends that I handle the kind of cases you never want to have to hire me for.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So and it's interesting, especially with you, because I've known you for a long time, and we go talk and riff about cases and get each other's opinions on situations and cases and whatnot. But you'll call me, for example, with a case where sad case where a family was killed in a car crash, but it's not just about the crash. It's about for example, in that case where I think a bridge went out or something.
That was one of the cases. It was a bridge washed out.
Yeah,
and, the facts in that case were so sad because it happened in a very rural area down in southeastern Indiana. Mm-hmm. And the people that lived near the bridge called it in.
Yeah. And
they told 911 the bridge is out. Mm-hmm. You need to get somebody down here before someone goes off this bridge. And the police dispatcher who took the call was a trainee.
Oh, gosh.
And the trainee actually didn't do anything wrong. It turned out that a supervisor went in and changed the call from I forget the code. One is I for informational only, you don't have to do anything. And the other one is, I think it was A for action, or I forget exactly, but that's a type of call that has to be cleared by a deputy, which means deputy has to go out, look.
Someone has to check on it, like at the actual location, right?
Right, and this supervisor changed it to an informational only, so no sheriffs were dispatched. And about 45 minutes later, my client was a mother who had 3 kids in the car, and she was going to work for the early shift and taking the kids to daycare. And it was dark and raining, and she drove right off the bridge.
Jeez. That's terrible. And so let's, another unique type of situation that involves a car crash as well, that you've dealt with in the past is we've all been in situations where we're driving along and we hit a bad traffic jam because of construction. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so a lot of even attorneys, just not only people in general, but attorneys don't realize that these construction companies that are doing work on the interstates and the highways and the roadways are subject to certain guidelines.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. So you tell me a little bit more about those types of cases, those situations.
Sure. Those cases are interesting because there are a number of federal regulations that address acceptable traffic backups.
Okay.
And since most interstates are partially funded by the federal government, that brings in the federal statutes. The other thing is that it is a well-known danger in the construction industry, particularly the highway construction industry, that the most dangerous place is at the end of the queue.
At the end of the queue?
The end of the queue. And in my case, it happened about midnight, and my lady had come to a stop. A car behind her came to a stop, and a semi behind them never even hit his brakes. And
wow.
But the traffic backup was miles long.
Okay.
And there's specific regs about how long a queue can last and how long in time and length.
So, and that's, to me, that's a big thing, because I've seen these cases, these situations, and I never thought of potential liability on the construction company.
The funny thing is, the INDOT has new sets of trucks that they put it towards the back of these queues. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the trucks, it has a trailer with the big flashing arrow.
Yeah.
But that trailer is designed to be hit by vehicles. It knows it's going to get struck. There are shock absorbers on
Wow.
this because they know just how dangerous this can be.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild. And so those cases, in particular, in those situations, is it similar to a construction site injury case in that you have GCs, subs, people like that on the?
Yeah, this was a huge construction project. It stretched for many miles.
Okay.
And I think we initially sued what we thought were the primary defendants. And the primary defendants basically non-partied everybody who had anything to do with the construction project.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to add them in order to protect our clients' interests. And at one point we had 23 defendants. And
Wow.
I remember taking depositions in rooms where it was me and 43 defense attorneys.
Oh my gosh, that's wild. So, we've talked about products cases, a lot of other cases. We talked in the other episode too, but I really want to kind of hone in on the cases that I've worked with you on primarily I call them construction site. You're smarter than I am, so you call them industrial.
No, those are two different types of cases, actually.
So they are?
They are.
Please explain to me. I
Sure.
want to learn.
Construction is its own animal in that it has its own code of federal regulations under
Right.
OSHA. So there's an actual set of regulations for the construction industry.
Yeah.
And that typically has to do with building or tearing down buildings. Industrial settings are injuries that occur in an ongoing operating factory.
I see.
So
Okay.
you can have these injuries occur in a factory, and in those cases, it's governed by Section 1910 of OSHA. But if it happens on a construction project, it's Section 1926.
Okay.
So they're similar because the OSHA regs are similar,
Yeah.
but they're a little bit different because typically you don't have a general contractor in an industrial accident.
Right. Right. So let's talk about construction site accidents. A lot of folks don't understand the makeup of a construction site as far as how many different companies can be on the site, how many different ways, and I don't want to necessarily say it's ways for them to avoid liability necessarily, but it can be.
It can be.
But yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, you've got subs of subs,
Yes.
GCs.
There's two basic different types of construction projects.
Yeah.
The one that everybody's pretty much familiar with involves a general contractor. And in that instance, the owner of the property hires the general contractor, and the general contractor then hires all of the subs. And under the contract between the owner and the general contractor, that's what defines the general contractor's responsibilities. So
Okay.
the first thing I do in those cases is I get the contracts between the general and the owner, and I know what contractual provisions to look for. And there's certain magic language that the Indiana Supreme Court has said this language is in there, that demonstrates that the general contractor has assumed a non-delegable duty of safety.
Okay, tell me what a non-delegable duty of safety is.
A non-delegable duty of safety means that you have a duty of safety
Okay.
that you cannot delegate away. So you're in charge of safety, and that means you're liable for your own negligence, and you're liable for the negligence of all the subs underneath you.
Wow.
And it's one of the very few instances in which we have kept not pure fault. It's not affected by comparative fault.
Okay.
So it's a form of vicarious liability, and
Yeah.
I know a number of defense lawyers when I butt heads because they don't think it should be vicarious, but I've read the law. I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
But that's important because it defines who's responsible, because sometimes some of the smaller subs will be a smaller company and they might not have good insurance. And unfortunately, when somebody gets hurt on a construction project, it's normally a pretty bad injury.
Bad.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's good because if you've got a big construction project, then you've got enough insurance there in place, and we can go up the ladder for the insurance. So I can collect
Right.
against the sub and against the general. But in many instances, and it all works out, it kind of washes out in the wash, so to speak, because there's indemnification provisions in the contracts that say, if I have
see.
to pay because of your fault, you're paying me back.
And all that happens well after the fact, after the plaintiff has been reimbursed, right?
Well, that's a good question. we deal with a lot of tenders of defense in our cases, and some declaratory judgment actions from time to time.
Yep.
So there's often a side fight going on between the general and the subs as to whose insurance is going to be applicable.
Right. And so in those cases, what would be kind of your process for showing that there was a non-delegable duty?
First thing, though, there's two different ways to prove non-delegable duty of safety. You can assume it under contract, or
Okay.
you can assume it by conduct.
Okay.
So the contract's pretty straightforward. If there's contractual language that clearly evinces an intent that the general contractor's in charge of safety, you're good to go there.
Yeah.
If you don't have good contract language, then we have to fall back and see if there's any conduct, any voluntary conduct by the general that demonstrates that they were in charge of safety. And the case that you and I worked on recently, that's what we ended up doing because we didn't have really good contracts.
Right.
But luckily for us, we had honest witnesses from the primary defendant, and they really couldn't deny it because the proof's in the records. You got to dig down into the records, and the devil's in the details.
Yes.
So luckily in this case, when you presented them, I know we presented a document that had 120 safety violations that the general issued to subcontractors on the site, 30 some of which I think were against the defendant we were suing. So it's like, it's kind of hard to say you weren't in charge of safety.
Right.
When I asked them questions like, did you have the authority to throw the sub off the job if they didn't follow your safety instructions? Yes.
Right.
Yes, I did. Did you ever do that? Yes, we did.
Yes.
So it's like we were able to show you had the control and you exercised it. So, they could have, the witnesses could have tried to say they weren't in charge of safety, but the documents made it absolutely clear that they were.
Right. And so let's talk a little bit about that. We've worked out two primary cases that I can think of that were significant, and we were able to do a lot of good for our client. And so the first one, it was a gentleman that fell down an elevator shaft,
An open
elevator shaft.
Yes.
And I thought, every time I think about that case, I call them trap cases, and Chip knows they laid a trap for him.
Absolutely.
Essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but that case, the contracts were pretty clear, weren't they?
Oh yeah, the contracts were good on that one.
Yeah. What you call them something? They're labeled. It's like a industry.
They're AIA contracts. That's the American Institute of Architects.
Okay.
And those are standard contracts. Most construction projects use them.
Okay.
So if I get a case and I see their AIA contracts, I know what versions of the contracts. If I see a specific contract, I know I've got the good language.
Yeah.
Just because that's where you find it. But that's the one kind of case. I only mentioned the general contractor. The other type of case is called the construction manager. And in the construction manager case, that's typically done when you're dealing with public entities like schools, like Lucas Oil. That was done through a construction manager scenario. And in that instance, the owner hires a construction manager, and then the owner directly contracts with all the subs.
Okay.
And the construction manager is just that. They're basically a contracted manager whose job it is to coordinate the efforts. Yeah. And in those instances, typically they don't exercise the amount of control over the subs, so you can't typically get into non-delegable duty that way. But, and I have a case right now, don't believe what the contract says, because I have one that the contract says it's a construction manager contract. And I get down into it, and there's a paragraph that will say, okay, this is what constitutes all the contract documents, and they give you a list. Well, one of those in that list was A201, general conditions of the contract. And that's the one I'm always looking for. And in the body of the contract, it says that all references to general contractor in the general conditions shall mean the construction manager. So even though they call themselves a construction manager, they weren't, because they accepted all the duties because the general conditions were applied.
Right.
So it's not just enough to look at the title of the contract. You have to dig down and find the language.
Do you, and I remember the first case we worked on, we did this a few times. Do you find yourself asking for additional discovery? Usually like, hey, you're missing this or
All
that?
the time. All the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
I remember there was quite a few rounds of that in both cases that we worked on.
Yep.
Yeah. So the second case, let's talk a little bit about the second case. Now, I remember the second case was a situation where we didn't have that contract. As a matter of fact, the contract said something different. And so in that case, we almost had an assumption of the duty by action.
Right, by
their
conduct,
actions.
yes.
Yeah, by their conduct. So, in that case, a gentleman was injured pretty badly when a wall had fallen down on him, which obviously isn't supposed to happen, but we were able to, via your discovery, right, the depositions.
Yep.
Yeah, we were able to show a non-delegable duty there. And so how much time do you spend? You spend a lot of time in deposition, don't you?
I do. I do.
Taking a lot of depots, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit. You've tried quite a few cases as well. As far as going to trial, what would you say is the part of trial that you enjoy the most?
I have found that, last couple times voir dire
Yeah.
has turned out to be really fun. There's a couple of really good authorities on how to conduct voir dire, and it's the only time that I get to have a conversation with the jury.
Yes.
I get to ask them questions.
Yeah.
And, if I had a case one time where a guy had a serious injury to his foot, and he had to have surgery. So I asked the jury panel, have any of you had serious injuries that required surgery? I got the group to talking.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay,
That's a great open-ended question too to be
Absolutely.
able to ask. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's the part I have most fun with is the voir dire.
What part do you look forward to the least? And you can't say listening to the defense attorney because we all
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. That's a good question. Cross-examination can be a lot of fun if you're prepared for it.
Yeah.
Sometimes some of the hardest part can be questioning your own witness. That can be really tricky.
Yes.
I mean, you spend a lot of time trying to make them comfortable, trying to get them relaxed.
Yeah.
And you put them on the stand and
Sometimes they don't listen.
things go awry.
Yes.
They take a detour you weren't expecting. So
Yes.
yeah, that's because you can't predict what they're going to say. No matter
Right.
what how you've helped them get ready, you just don't know.
Yeah. And you're, as far as a lot of the cases that you get a lot of referral cases, right?
The vast majority of my cases are referred to me by other attorneys.
By other lawyers.
Sometimes I get them in from workers' comp carriers, because if a person's injured on the job and then they get workers' comp. In exchange for getting workers' comp, you cannot sue the employer. They are absolutely immune. The workers' comp company or insurance company pays out all this money for the injuries.
Yeah.
And they have a subrogated interest. So if we find a third party that we can go collect from, they get paid back. So the smart, savvy workers' comp carriers know enough that if it's a big injury, that they want to encourage a third party case because it's going to help them recoup some of their funds.
Right. And you are really good at getting max value on those.
Well, I try. I try.
So some of let's talk about in your career, maybe some of the bigger milestones that you can remember, cases maybe, or even trials or.
I was involved with a series of cases early on against a national daycare chain.
Okay.
And it involved sexual abuse.
Oh.
And they were hiring people that they had no business hiring. And in a half an hour of me checking their references after the case was filed, I was able to determine that the person's entire job history was faked, was false.
Wow.
And there was a series of these cases that we handled. This was back in the late 80s. And
In Colorado?
in Colorado, and I think there was a couple other states. I can't
Yeah.
remember. But I remember that because of the cases that I brought and was successful on, the insurance carrier for the daycare company canceled their insurance. And you can't operate without insurance.
Yeah.
So they were forced to sell. And the company that bought them actually knew what the hell they were doing. And they
Right.
started operating them properly. So there's an indirect benefit of what we do.
Yes.
Because thanks to plaintiffs' lawyers, we don't have flammable kids' pajamas.
Correct.
We don't have garage doors that crush children. We don't have Pintos that blow up when they're rear-ended. We don't have pickup trucks with the gas tank right behind the seat.
Yes.
So there's been a lot of societal benefits that plaintiffs' lawyers have brought about because it's the only system that can hold the companies responsible for what they've done.
Yes. And holding them, I love that you said that, because holding them responsible in a language they can speak. Because, someone dies, they don't, maybe they feel bad, maybe they don't, but where they're really going to feel it is in their pocketbook,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
That's where they're really going to feel it.
Right. And one of the bad things about Indiana law, you asked me earlier, some of the downsides to Indiana law. There's two kinds of damages that you can recover in a injury case. One's compensatory.
Right.
That's to compensate the person for their injuries. The other one is punitive.
Yeah.
And punitive is to punish. It's to make sure that this doesn't happen again. The problem with Indiana's law is punitive damages go to the state, not to the injured person. So there's no incentive for a plaintiff's lawyer to pursue punitive damages because it's all going to somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah. And the only incentive is you'd have to have a client that was just so wronged so horribly that is their motivation.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the problem is the companies know that punitive damages aren't really viable against them in this state, so they get a little lax with things.
They do. Absolutely. You mentioned earlier that you were the first in your family to be a lawyer, but now you have a family full of lawyers.
I do. I
Right?
do. Yes.
Right? So as far as your kids going to law school, have you talked to them kind of about what motivated them?
They saw me in the cases I worked on because, I never mention clients' names or anything like that. But, the kids are like, well, what's this case about?
Right.
And you explain to them. And I used to tease my friends that my kids could drive by a construction site and pick out the OSHA violations. They're like, Dad, that guy's not wearing fall protection. So, it kind of rubbed off on them.
Yeah.
But, it's fun what we do.
Right.
No
It
two
is.
cases are ever the same. And because of what we do, like with the portable kerosene heaters, I did those cases for about 5 or 6 years. And then they kind of petered out.
Yeah.
Then I got involved in some SUV rollover litigation.
Yep.
Did that for a series of years. It kind of goes in spurts. And, it's kind of fun to come up to speed and have to learn a whole new area.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
What is one piece of advice you'd give a young lawyer now, young plaintiff's attorney, that you wish you would have gotten when you were younger?
Actually, I got the advice.
You did?
Yeah, and it was a senior partner that sat me down and he said, assume the best piece of evidence you could possibly want in the case is smoking gun.
Yeah.
And assume it exists and ask questions as if it exists and dig for it. Because if you don't ask for it, if you don't look for it, you're not
Right.
going to find it. And all too often, sadly, we find the smoking gun. The corporation knew what it was doing.
Yeah.
And they chose to do it anyway.
Right. Right. It's just kind of like ask for what you want, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Assume the worst
Yeah.
and ask what you want. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, majority of the time, it proves to be accurate.
Right. Right. Some of your hobbies outside of the law, I know you're a big Disney guy.
Yes, I am.
Right?
Mhm.
You're getting ready to go.
Yes.
Okay. So, did you grow up as a big Disney kid or where'd that kind of,
Well, actually,
how'd that evolve?
my grandfather was friends with Walt Disney.
What?
Yep.
Really?
Yeah, they served in World War II in the Red Cross Ambulance Corps together.
Oh my gosh.
He lived, at the time, Disney was living in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was from Chicago.
Okay.
My grandfather was too young to join the military, but the Red Cross would take him earlier, take him younger. So they both signed up for the Red Cross because Walt was even younger than my grandfather. And their unit shipped out to France,
Yeah.
and they served as ambulance drivers, and they shuttled VIPs around in France.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and since then, you've kind of
Just grew up around it. My mom was a huge Disney fan.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just, it's fun. There's so
Yeah.
much history, and to see the company grow, because most people don't know that Disney has 12 resorts around the world.
That's wild.
Yeah, the sun never sets on a Disney park. It's crazy. But our bucket list is to hit all the parks.
Really?
And we've done all the parks in the U.S. My daughter did the park in Paris, and there's parks in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and I think, is that all of them? Because there's multiple parks at each one of those places.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what our goal is, to hit all the parks around the world.
What's your favorite park at the Orlando and what is it, Disney
World.
Disney World in Orlando?
Yes.
Yeah.
Probably Epcot.
Yeah. Why?
It's more educational. It's more technology focused, but it's also more adult focused. It's probably the most adult focused of all the parks.
Yeah.
The back of the park's called World Showcase, and there's 11 different pavilions of countries around the world. Mm-hmm. And there's a game that people play down there called Drinking Around the World.
Oh yeah.
And you have to have a drink in each one of the 11 countries. And so that's a fun activity. I've done it with my family. I mean, they had T-shirts made where you could check off the country as you did it.
Oh, yeah.
It's cute. We've scaled it back. We share a drink at each one.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because there's a lot of countries there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. What's your favorite ride there at Epcot?
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay.
Rise of the what is it? Guardians of the Galaxy. Oh shoot.
It's not Rock and Roll
No,
it's or something like that.
No, it's about the Big Bang.
Yeah.
But
but it's a great ride though.
It is a great ride.
Took the kids on it. Yeah, they loved it. They really loved it.
And it's neat because for whoever hasn't been on it, the car you're in spins 360 degrees while you're on it. But it's not uncontrolled. They point you to where they want you to see.
Right.
So it's neat.
Right.
It's a good ride.
Right. Yeah. And I really enjoyed that Ratatouille ride too. I thought that was cool.
That was very good.
Yeah, the kids really loved it. So,
Mm-hmm.
Some of your involvement with other organizations like the Indiana Trial Lawyers, the Indianapolis Bar Association. What are some of the organizations you're involved with?
I'm on the Indy Bar Foundation.
Okay.
I'm involved with them. I'm also in the Indy Bar Association and the Indiana Trial Lawyers Association are probably the three biggest.
Yeah.
That I am getting more involved at the AAJ level.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
think with your practice, I think that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's nationwide. So, you're still taking on referral cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if anyone out there is listening and you have a bad construction site injury or construction site case, you've got to get a hold of Tim.
I'm lucky because I've been doing this long enough. I'm in my 37th year of practice that I can be selective about my cases.
Right.
And I can pick and choose them. And
Yeah.
that makes a big difference.
Yeah. Well, you bring him a good case. Don't bring him a shitty case.
Well, I'll let you know if it's not a good case.
So Tim, tell me a little bit. What's next for you? What's next for Tim Devereux?
I'm enjoying traveling more because of what I do. The COVID was kind of a hidden present for a lot of us because we found we can work effectively remotely.
Yeah.
So that allows me, I can travel. I have plans in the coming years to spend January in the warm South working.
Warm.
And
yes.
I've got a friend that's doing it right now for the month of January, and it's working out well. So
yeah, I might join you. I might sleep on the couch or something.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. You just don't want me to bring all my damn kids down there. You guys are lucky you're not hearing them up there. My wife took them somewhere. I can't remember. But so if people want to get a hold of you, Tim, how can they do that?
I am at wagnerreese.com. That's our website, wagnerreese.com. Our office is in Carmel, Indiana. You can just find us on the online and just give me a call.
Absolutely. Tim, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It's been my absolute pleasure.
I appreciate it. So thanks everyone for listening to Circle City Conversations. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any more future conversations.